All right then, Brendan Telfer is in the studio with us. A couple of texts that are coming already, Telf. So pleased to hear you back on the air, Brendan. Congrats on 50 years. I recall your major health scare back in 2009, I think it was. It was actually 2008, I think it was.
No, 9.
Was it 9?
Yeah.
Amazing longevity despite being a wet Liberal, says this text.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Great to hear Telf in studio. Love listening to the daily crossovers on Radio Sport between you two, says Jason. And I love this one from Paul Rooney. So Paul Rooney, is that Jay? You got memory goes back a bit there, Jason. Yeah. Rooney says, and he's tweeted, he says he's still the owner of the stupidest question ever asked of a sports person, asking Nick Farr-Jones after they've been beaten 6-0 by the All Blacks at Eden Park. It was actually 6-3, Paul. Yeah. And it was in 1991, all penalties. What do you think of the streaker? The look was withering. Can you remember that?
I do, and I'm sorry that Paul didn't put his reply in. Because he said to me, what's his name, the Aussie captain?
Nick Farr-Jones.
Nick Farr-Jones said to me, it came at a very bad time, he said, because we just had a little surge on and then we had to stop for this clown and it really cocked us up.
What a great reply. Brilliant.
Yeah. And anyway, there were ramifications. On Monday morning, a suit came down from upstairs. And said, I just want to make it known that we don't want those sort of questions being asked. If streakers are appearing on the field, we don't recognise them or acknowledge them in any shape or form. And they never have they?
No, they don't. They
Last week on the Warriors, they were coming on every 5 minutes.
They weren't streakers, Brendan. They were dickheads because they were all fully clothed, and that was for TikTok. I mean, I think there's still something fundamentally not okay, but it's certainly tolerable about the nude person. I mean, there's something nude. I mean, it's you've gone to a bit of an effort. Anyway, 50 years in the saddle as of yesterday, being a sports broadcaster. Good God. I mean, no one's actually going to have that longevity anymore because they don't let people last that long because as soon as you get to your age or even my age, you're going to get dumped. We're the wrong sex and the wrong colour. And I'm not making a big deal of it, but we are these days to actually get jobs.
To some people we are,
To some people we are in broadcasting. I prefer the United States model where you've actually got to have 20 years experience, where you have some historical knowledge before you're actually allowed these jobs. But what a brilliant career, mate. And you look back at it, so many highlights. Before you got to Radio Sport and I met you and we got to be mates and things, you had already had a wonderful career up until then. You were brought in because this loudmouth rhymes with a tanker, starts with a W from Wellington was going to be the breakfast host. Remember, and Bill Francis says, don't worry, Brendan, this guy's going to make some noise. You were brought in to steady the ship because the 9 till 12...
They wanted a boring sort of relief from the madcap 3 hours from 6 to 9.
And also, you were our Kim Hill because the 9 till 12 shift to me always defined those stations. The breakfast show is a breakfast show regardless. And Today FM could have learned that because they hired somebody who wasn't a breakfast announcer. But then the 9 till 12 slot normally defines the station. And that was you with a longer interviews and a bit more tempered in your approach.
This is a very long question, Martin.
What I'm asking you more than anything else is it's a wonderful life, isn't it, mate?
Oh,
That's more of a comment than a question.
It is. But curious enough, the thing that I've sort of thought about most of all in the last couple of days is I think about the second day that I was at this job in the NZBC at the McLean Institute in Christchurch, just off Colombo Street. 3ZB was the station I was working at the time. And I came home and I said to my dear wife at the time, who's sadly departed this world.
Was that the first, second or third one, Brendan?
The first, Yes. And I said to her, her name was Gina, and I said, Gina, you'll never guess what happened what they gave me at work today. She said, what? Well, she's quite worried. I said, they put a typewriter on my desk. I've got my own typewriter.
Fantastic.
And I couldn't get over that. That was the most extraordinary thing, to have your own typewriter. And it was someone from the accountants department or somewhere came along and I had to sign for this. And when I think back to where we are with technology, there you are, on the air and doing about 4 or 5 different things on your phone, and the world that we live in now, the technology that we live in, this technology bubble. And back in 1973, the equivalent was a typewriter on my desk.
But what hasn't changed, and this is the beautiful thing about it, is this hasn't changed on, off, with a set of headphones on and a microphone on, and the ability to talk about sport or detail sport or recall sport or commentate sport. And that doesn't get taught or trained anymore, right?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, how much training did they actually give you?
Oh, yeah, I had quite a bit, and I remember there was a guy, every station used to have a head announcer, right? And one of his functions was he didn't do much announcing on air, but he had a good career as an announcer, and he would train the new people and the journalists, the sports guys, as well as the announcers. And his name, the guy that was looking after them in Christchurch was a guy called Wally Chamberlain. And he was a legendary figure in radio. In fact, he was Neville Chamberlain's brother. You remember Neville?
I remember that
Cham
name.
the man?
Yep.
And So I went to him, and he gave me some scripts to read, and he gave me a few other things to do, and he said, Brendan, you speak too fast. You speak far too quickly. In radio, this was the NZBC, of course, back in 1973, where we all used to have this plummy, pommy accent to get on the air. But he said, I will say this about you, that even though you speak very quickly, I can understand what you're saying.
Right.
So he didn't really alter me much, and I still think I speak too quickly. But anyway, we had lots of training, and even right up until, well into my years in television, TVNZ, I suppose it was TVNZ, in the 1980s would bring out BBC commentators, people like John Motson, Barry Davies, and these guys.
These guys are legends,
and they would sit, and I can remember Barry Davies sitting behind me and Graham Thorne doing a Ranfurly Shield match at a rugby park in Hamilton. It was the day that Wellington lifted the shield with Bernie
81.
Fraser and Stu Wilson having ripper of the games. And Barry Davies sat behind us, and the next day back in Auckland we had a meeting, and I thought, oh, here we go, this up himself pommy guy's going to sit there and say, oh no, we don't do that in the BBC, and we don't do this in the BBC. But he was very complimentary of both Thorny and myself, actually.
Right.
And I think he understood that this wasn't Britain, this was New Zealand. And gradually during that time in the 70s and 80s, public broadcasting in this country came to accept the credibility and validity of the Kiwi accent.
Go on.
See, someone like yourself or me now.
I wouldn't get, no, we wouldn't have been
back
employed,
in the 70s, no. I mean, I used to go home and practice. I'd read stories out of the newspaper trying to... And that is the news read by Brendan Telfer, and trying to get that real plummy accent. But gradually... we came to feel very comfortable with who we are.
Which is why, and we are now.
Yeah.
Why sport instead of, say, politics or news? Did you make a conscious decision?
I'd always been interested in broadcasting. I grew up in Wellington listening to the 2ZB, and my heroes were people like Peter Sinclair. Yes, he was one of my heroes. I loved Peter. And I used to go and watch him do the Sunset Show from 4:30 to 7 o'clock on 2ZB in Broadcasting House in Bowen Street. And Justin Dufresne was another one.
Oh, Justin's fantastic.
I just loved broadcasting from a very early age, and thought I'd like to have a crack at it sometime. And so I'd gone overseas, done the OE thing, came back, and was working for an insurance company. And one morning I was having my breakfast listening to 2ZB when an ad came on the radio. In Christchurch. I came back from a holiday and I was OE, and I was living in Christchurch. And I heard this advertisement on 3ZB for a sports officer. A junior sports officer required. And so if you're interested, ring this number. So I was sitting at the bus stop waiting to get the bus into town to go to work. And I remembered this number and I wrote it down. And so when I got to work, I rang this number and they said yes. And I spoke to somebody else. And eventually they invited me round for an interview. And it was a sports job. And I thought, oh, well, I've played sport all my life. I know something about sport. It was the natural place to go rather than to say into news or current affairs.
What was your job at the time? What were you doing?
I was working for an insurance company, and I was insuring animals that were bought and sold at rural cattle fairs, whatever you call them. And so I'd go out to these little farming towns, and someone would buy 10 cows that they wanted for their farm up in the North Island somewhere, and I would insure them to get back safe and sound to the farm. So I was doing that for about a year when this came along, and so about 2 or 3 months later I got another phone call and said, come in and you're in the shortlist of about 5 people. And this time I had to go out to a national Rothmans League soccer match, as they were called, at English Park.
That's a cigarette company, people, okay?
And do a written report, and then read it in the studio on a match between between Christchurch United and Blockhouse Bay.
Wow.
And Terry Connolly was the coach of Christchurch United.
Wow, those names.
And there was a famous coach of the Blockhouse Bay team, his name escapes me now. So I did this little piece, it was 3-2 or something, the score to Christchurch United, went in and read it, and then I had to do an interview with Greg Chappell. And this guy,
this is during the 70s. This is when he was bashing the guy on the buttocks with the bat.
Greg Chappell was played out by the boss of the...
God.
So he was Greg. Right. I was interviewing Greg Chappell.
Yep.
And so I did these things, and they liked it. And so a month or so later, I got the job.
So 1976 was your first Olympic Games. Did you do the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch?
Yes, I did the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch in 1974. I'd only been there 6 months, and I wasn't down as part of the team, but one of the radio presenters, a guy called Ray Cody. You'd probably remember,
that name.
He was a senior figure in radio. His wife became very ill just prior to the start of the 74 Commonwealth Games in Christchurch. And because I lived there and Ray wasn't able to go south, I was asked if I would do the some commentating or some presenting, and I had to do some badminton commentaries, and that was one of my first cock-ups.
Is this the one where they told you to shut up?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great story. Yeah. This is brilliant, hey.
I was doing it with a guy called Albie Duckmanton, who was quite a prominent cricketer and a very good badminton player, and we were up on the top row. It was inside, it was in an interior stadium, but there was no door or glass around us. We were just out there like members of the public, and it was the final, the men's singles final between a bloke from Canada and a bloke from Malaysia, whose names I can't recall now, but about 5 or 10 minutes into the match, there was a stoppage, and the two players went over and spoke to the chair umpire, and the chair umpire got down, and so I'm commentating this live saying, well, there's clearly something upsetting these players. Maybe it's the lights at the back of the stadium, the television lights, which are very bright, but anyway, they're going to get them rectified, and so they're coming up the stairs now, probably to have a look at these lights and talk to someone, and then they stopped at my row, came along and said, and it went out on air, excuse me, the players, this is the official, the chair umpire, said, excuse me, the noise coming from your commentary team is disturbing the players down there. Could you keep your voices down? And so we spoke very quietly for the rest of the match. So that was my introduction to the Commonwealth Games in 1974, yeah.
And then 76 you go to the Olympics, and it's a great story. We're going to get the Quinster on shortly. Do you want to give him a bell, Locke? And then John McBeth will join us. Brendan is with us in the studio, people. Normally the Brendan Telfer Experience. Around about 3:30 on a Wednesday, courtesy of JK's World of Golf at Auckland Airport, 24/7 open. You can go and bang a box of balls whenever you want. 1976, and look, I remember this as a 12-year-old, and I think I've told you this story. It was a Sunday morning in New Zealand, and when that final was on, New Zealand were playing Australia in the final. We beat Pakistan in the semi-final, and it was extraordinary that we had got...
Saturday morning.
Was it a Saturday morning? Saturday morning. We had got to the final of a gold medal match. Now, John Walker was running the 1500, and we all thought that he was going to win that because in 74, him and Bai in the 1500, but Bai wasn't there because of the boycott, right? And then this hockey match.
Yeah.
And I remember Einerson had his kneecap, or the kneecap broken. And
the goalkeeper
Trevor
Manning,
had his kneecap broken. Yeah. Einerson scored the only goal. We won it. And when I listen to the commentary these days, you don't even sound like you. No. You don't even sound like you. But to have to go out and buy a rule book to get yourself up to speed. You imagine that these days, if there was no internet, people, all of a sudden, you're being asked to actually commentate on a game. How the hell do you do that?
Well, I don't know. And I didn't have a comments man either. Actually, I had my brother sitting next to me who lived in America. He came up and jumped over the fence and came up and sat in the commentary booth. But, I think I did find a book. Harold Anderson, who was the head of the TVNZ team, and I said to him, he said, I'm sorry, Brendan. He said, it was never part of our planning because we didn't expect the hockey team to make the final. So, but he said, we've managed to get piggy bank the feed going into Australia, the satellite feed, and so we're going to take it, and we've just got to get out of it. As soon as the hockey match is finished, we're going to the stadium for these 1,500 or 5,000 metres final. So he said, you're the only person that can do it. There's no other commentary available. It's not like today where you could just put a plug in and take commentary from all around the world. And so he said the only advice I can envisage is to go down to Montreal and down to the city and find a book. I think I did find one, actually, and I remember reading it in my room. But I can still remember the comment I made. Have you got it, have you?
No, we'll try and find it, actually. Look, if you can find it. It was
a penalty corner, and I think Barry Meister hit the ball out, and Einerson trapped it, and Tony Einerson, and it's there!
It's there!
New Zealand have scored! They lead 1-0!
Oh, have you got it? Brilliant.
I think I have. Hold on.
Hang on.
Stand by.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Is it that there? I think it is here, Brendan. Let's play. If I can get it.
Number 10, but it's Christensen firstly. He'll hit the ball out to Meister. Stopped by Meister, and the shot by Einerson, and it's there! New Zealand have scored through Tony Einerson. 6 minutes into the second half. It's New Zealand 1, Australia 0.
Now, when I went to the Olympics with you in 2004, and we were in Athens, and Keith Quinn, who's about to join us, the Quinster, one of the big rivalries between you and Quinn was who had called the most gold medals, and I think you were actually ahead of him at that stage because you did the triathlon, didn't you? In Athens.
Yeah.
And he joins us. Quinster, my dear man, welcome to the show, and also Brendan Telfer, 50 years of broadcasting as of yesterday. Hello, Keith.
Isn't that staggering? I'm amazed that he's made it, because way back in 1976, I thought that'll be it for him. He'll never work again. He'll be working in the back of a butcher's shop, which is honourable work. But yeah,
it's a long time ago, Quiddy, isn't it? Hey,
my word, it is. And do you remember, Brendan? They gave us blue suits to wear to those Olympics in Montreal, and they were shocking. And
polyester, I hope.
They had no cut to them at all. They weren't stylish in any way. But we were proud to wear them.
We were, but speaking of the uniforms, one thing that I do remember, which I held against you at the time, is that when we got to Montreal after a very long trip from New Zealand, the plane stopping every 5 minutes down the road, and we finally got into our apartments, and I was rooming with Peter Montgomery, and he was going off to do the yachting, I think down at Lake Superior or somewhere, but we were together in this room for a few days, and you were in a separate room with John Davies, and you came in once we'd sort of settled in, you came into our room, just to sort of say, share a beer or something before we try to get some sleep, and you said, my God, what's that smell? Oh, and he picked up my shoes and he said, Telfer, these shoes of yours are absolutely disgusting. And we're on about the 6th floor of this apartment. He went out onto the deck, Quinn, and threw my shoes over the balcony.
Is that right,
You remember that, Quinn?
Into the street, and the socks went with them. Actually, the socks are worse than the shoes. It had been a long flight, as I recall. But I remember also the next thing was that you went down on your bare feet and picked them up off the footpath.
Oh, okay. Well, that probably was the only pair I had, but it was...
The other thing I remember that from that trip and working with you there is that you've just played the hockey gold medal. We both broadcast gold medals on the same day. Because you did that one and I did the 1500.
You did the 1500, Keith, yeah.
But Quinny, the other story from Montreal, which I suppose in this very PC woke age I shouldn't be telling, but we were going on a metro train each day down to this Olympic Park because the swimming pool was next to the track and field stadium, so we were travelling together. And there was all these foreign journalists from 100 different countries all speaking these foreign languages. So I said to Quinny, why don't we just speak Maori? So I was going, Hinimo, Paikakariki, Taranaki.
Start at the top of the island, work your way down, mate.
Quinny would put a few more towns in, and so all these people were turning around thinking, I wonder where they're from, but yeah.
The other thing I remember is that the station we had to get off of, the people said, get off at Pi X. I said, what's that? What's the name of the station? Pi X. It turns out in French it was P9, which is Pope Pius the IX in French.
Right, okay.
We didn't know anything like that, so we just called it Pi X.
Pi X,
I am in the presence of royalty here, people on the platform. I got Keith Quinn on the phone, and I got Brendan, and between the two of you, I suppose it's probably a century of experience in sports broadcasting, and two of the greatest names in New Zealand sports broadcasting, Keith. The floor is yours. I'm just going to leave you two alone to chat to each other for a few minutes and back off and not say anything. You two go.
I'm just going to get in early, Martin, before Quinn tells me a story. Quinny, I know you've got some dirt on me, and that's fair enough, but it's all water under the bridge now. But I first of all want you to tell me who the guy was that won the 5,000 metres at the Edmonton Commonwealth Games in 1978. He was a very famous British long-distance runner whose first name was Brendan, and his second name was Foster. But what did you call him when he went across the finish line in that final in 1978? Who won that race?
Yes, I had a habit of doing this because I called Brendan Telfer as the winner, and I also called Martin Devlin as the winner of the Rugby World Cup.
Yes, you did. In 2003 it was, Keith. It was, and I can remember the quote. It was wrapping it up right at the end, and it was Martin Devlin, Johnny Wilkinson, and the whole England team. And look, McBeth's going to join us in a little bit. He said that he was there. Fox was laughing, and John Hart was laughing too, Keith. And I gave you that CD when we were in Wanaka, and I promised you I would never play it again, and I haven't played it since, my friend.
Well, I don't know. You have to be honest here. Have you never played it again?
I promised you that weekend I wouldn't play it again, and I have never played it again.
I thought it led every program we did for the next 20 years.
It was going to, but after I was telling this story to McBeth, actually, Telf as well, I'll just butt in for a second, is that we go down to Wanaka, right? Me and Keith are doing a speaking engagement together. We're also staying in the same accommodation, and this is without a word of a lie. We get to Queenstown Airport. I get my bag off the carousel as it's coming past. Keith just looks at me and just gives me an eyebrow. My bag. What do you mean? Well, so I have to collect his bag, and then we take it to the room. There's a double bed in one room and a couch in the other. He says, Martin, my bag will just go on my bed. So there was the Quinster. There was the Quinster just doing the pecking order. And I'm sitting there going, hang on a second, I'm a 45-year-old man. I'm a big noise in this business. He says, Martin, bag on the bed. I slept on the couch. I'll leave you two to it.
Of course, Brendan, I remember you talk about these Olympics and that, but I remember the first time I ever was aware of you at the microphone was when we of NZBC, we were the lofty state-owned television. We held all the big cheeses, and suddenly along came this other station called TV2, I think you were called, weren't you? And you were a private station, but we never bothered about you except when you suddenly started running the athletics series. What was that official title of that?
Pan Am International Track Series.
The Pan Am International Track Series. And I thought, well, goodness, they're in business here. I better listen to see what the event is like and who's doing the commentaries. And on came this voice for Brendan Telfer. But so I was very nervous about it too. I hope he's not very good, so because he'll sneak past me in the pecking order. But then I thought, no. After 2 laps of the women's 800 metres, he kept talking about this woman called Penelope Gray from Australia. Penelope Gray.
Penelope Gray. I've never lived that down. Yeah, poor old Penelope.
Yeah, John Davies was trying to correct you with Penelope Gray, and then so wherever you went in the world, Penelope Gray followed you around. But we also had a little gag that became quite famous.
Oh yeah, the Tofino gag. Yeah, tell that. Yeah,
that was the Terry Tofino gag. Which
you heard this one, Mark?
I'm sitting here.
This is the great story.
Okay, go on, Keith.
This was from the Commonwealth Games in Edmonton, wasn't it?
No, it was Brisbane, 1982.
Brisbane 82. Yeah. Brisbane 82. And I was the commentator, and Brendan was the interviewer at the side of the track. And the women's final was about to be run of the 4x400 metre relay, and
the men's final. Yeah.
Which one? The men's final.
The men's final, yeah.
And so that meant there were 8 lanes, 4 in each team. That's 32 names from people all over the Commonwealth, all races, colours and creeds, that had to be delivered urgently to the commentator. And I looked at the names as they came up, and sure, there was 4 from England, 4 from Scotland, 4 from South Africa, 4 from New Zealand, etc., etc. But the Nigerian team only had 3 names. So I called down to my colleague Brendan Telfer and my very dear friend Brendan Telfer to say, listen, we've only got 3 names from the Nigerian team. Do you think you could find the name of the 4th member of the Nigerian team for me urgently, because the race is about to be run in 4 minutes' time? You should take over the story from here, Brendan.
Well, that's right. So I went into this start room, and there was 100 people running around with bits of paper, as you could imagine, at the start of an international track and field meeting. I said to someone, look, I just need the Nigerian team. I need the full name. And this person said, look, go and talk to that guy over there in the corner. He's the guy that authorises the release to the media of the start list. So I went over to this guy who looked very hassled. And I said, excuse me. I said, I'm from Television New Zealand, and I've just had a urgent call from our commentators. They've only got 3 names in the Nigerian team, and he desperately needs to know the name of the 4th. He said, mate, can't you see what's going on here? You want what? The 4th member of the Nigerian team? I tell you what, mate, if I know who the 4th name is, if I care. And so he said, get out. Piss off, Cecil. So I went back and I said, I called up Quinn. I said, Quinny, no joy, mate. I said, I'll tell you what this rude bloody guy said to me. He basically said, F this and F that. He said, what? Oh, okay. Well, that's what we'll call him. We'll call him Fred Tofino. And so sure enough, and so anyway, Fred Tofino ran the last leg of the Nigerian team in the 4x100 metres at the Commonwealth Games in 1982. Anyway, it's at the risk of sounding a bit boring yet, 2 years later, Quinny and I were sitting together in the main stadium at the Coliseum in Los Angeles at the Olympic Games in 1984, and it comes up to the 4x100 metres. And then I just Quinny, I said, hey, Quinny, I know you're not going to believe that. That's Fred Tofano. He's down there warming up again in the Nigerian team. He's now 32 years old. Brilliant. And so we put Fred Tofano in the 4x100 metres.
Did it again?
Did it again, and we did it at every Commonwealth Games and every Olympic Games from that point on, and no one ever got wind of it. And Quinny even had him in a table tennis team one year. I think he was doing table tennis doubles or somewhere.
I did.
And
I did. It was our private joke. Tofano. He also carried the opening ceremony in a few school countries. But I think we should stop here and point out to your listeners, Martin, that Brendan was never very good at the pomp and ceremony of those opening ceremony type events. He didn't like them at all. But the TVNZ staff used to say, well, Quinn, you need assistance at the microphone. It's a huge event. And when we got to the Los Angeles opening ceremony, which was going to be a glittering display of the best of Americana and Hollywood and so on, we went to the rehearsal. And as we came away, Brendan said, what a load of rubbish. What a load of rubbish. I said, that was fantastic. What a fantastic display of everything that's good about the story of Americana and its influence on jazz and music and showbiz and film, and it was great. So when we got to the opening ceremony, Brendan was still grumbling about it, but it was wonderful. I don't know if you remember it. They shot a man across...
A rocket man,
a rocket man across the arena.
Came in from nowhere.
Beautiful. And at one stage there was 100 guys, cowboys, on firing pistols into the air, and there was being chased by Red Indians. It was the whole story.
Well, you're not allowed that anymore, Keith. Good God, you're not allowed to do that, mate. Our order.
It was a bit corny at the time, but
yes.
What really impressed me was that out of the one corner of the Coliseum at LA came 84 white grand pianos, and there were 84 men sitting at them in white morning suits, and they were playing the greatest story of American music, George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and it was just fantastic. And I thought, this is wonderful. It doesn't get any better than this. So I turned for a comment from my co-commentator, Brendan Telfer, and he was sitting back with his shirt off, getting sunbathing, reading a paperback. And he said to me, no, load of rubbish.
Yeah, it was, Quinny. Just
rubbish.
woke.
Keith, I should have introduced you to my friend Peter Montgomery, because when we did the opening ceremony in 2004 on the radio, I was in a studio. I crossed to Montgomery at the track, and then I went out and got dinner. I went to the toilet 3 times. By the time he stopped talking, mate, there was 1 minute to go in the opening ceremony. He didn't pause for breath for 90 minutes. I'm not bloody joking.
Quinny, just on that note, what about, I'll let you tell the end of the story. At the 1990 Commonwealth Games in Auckland, we're doing the opening ceremony with Angela D'Ordney. For some reason, but unbeknown to us, Powers That Be wanted one of their top female newsreaders involved in the opening ceremony. And so Angela came along, and she didn't have to do any real research or anything, and she got a few notes that they were handed out to all the broadcasters. And so Quinny and I were doing the teams coming in, and there was 50 or 60 teams, and we'd got all this research, and we had all the symbolism behind their flags, what it meant, and and then it came to one of these countries, and Quinny said, listen to this. And so in came a small little country somewhere from the Pacific or somewhere, and let's look at that. Vanuatu. And now, Quinny, tell us about the flag.
Yes, I said I had a little note for each country, and I passed it over to Angela. I tapped the piece of paper, and she said, oh, I've just been handed a note about the Vanuatu team and the Vanuatu flag. And the red symbolises the battles that they had, and the sun shines, represents the gold of the Pacific, where they come from. And it was, of course, all nonsense, all made up.
All made up. And she read it word for word.
She read it word for word and read it beautifully.
Yeah. Beautifully as she would.
Right now I feel ashamed about that, but she'd done none of the preparation. When we went to meetings beforehand, Telfer and I would arrive with reams of paper backing up the other nations that were there, and Angela would arrive discussing whether she
should be wearing.
Totally.
Anyway,
All right, Keith, we're going to have to leave you there, mate. Sorry.
Have I got my favourite story about when Telf caught short commentating and needed to go to the bathroom?
Well, let's finish on that. Let's do that. Finish on that, because then McBeth's going to join us. But yes, please do. Go ahead.
He couldn't get out of the studio because the match he was doing was going far too long. But then he noticed an empty Coca-Cola bottle in the rubbish bin in the corner. No. And he had no problems after that.
Except the only really embarrassing point was this was a volleyball match in Spain. Where was it? Whatever, Barcelona in 1992, and the little commentary booth was just kind of like in this setup here, just over there, and there's no way I could get to the bathroom and back, which was miles away, between sets. And so I thought it's only going to be 3 sets, so it went to 4 sets and 5 sets, and I had to go. And I spied a half-empty Coke bottle that some previous commentator had been using for some commentary, and so I filled it up while I was commentating, and this is a great dig and a magnificent smash from Joe Bloggs from Yugoslavia. But the most embarrassing point was how I got it out of the studio.
Oh, for God's sake.
Because I had to walk in front of everyone in the control room, and they were all looking at this 2-litre bottle of yellow Coke that I was trying to hide as I slipped out of the control room. But anyway, yeah.
They need to do, and when I say they, Sky need to put you guys in a room and get you to tell all these stories and make a documentary out of it, mate. Keith, thank you. It's lovely to talk to you again, bro.
Thanks, Quinny. Cheers, mate.
Okay, all the best, mate.
Yep.
Let's go to McBeth. Call up John McBeth. And I'll tell you one little story about Angela Dordney. She used to read, rest in peace, she used to read the news, of course, on News Talk ZB when we were at Radio Sport. And was such a professional, hated making mistakes. And you know what Matt Brown's like, Matty Brown. I mean, like, and Matt Brown, we love him to death, but by God, he was, you think I'm 100 miles an hour, mate. He was 190,000 miles an hour, wasn't he? And he'd always be late to go into the studio, and so we used to set traps for him so that he'd trip over things, and he'd get in there and he'd bang and he'd crash and hit the microphone. And one time he makes a complete cock of a bulletin, and he trips over all these words, and he comes out and he makes it, well, that didn't go too well. And Angela Dordney came out of the news booth and said, well, the problem is nobody knows who you are, but everybody knows who I am.
Yes, that was Angela.
That was her.
We loved her very dearly. Yeah.
McBeth is online, I'm pretty sure. Is he, Lachlan? He's not pick. Here he is. He's just picking up now. Here he goes. Yeah, Brendan Telfer is with us. We've only got about another 10 minutes to go before 4 o'clock when we wrap
and just
it all
before we go any further, Martin, Lockie, I know that you always finish your show with a piece of music. As a special kind of request from me,
sure.
The song I'd like to finish with today is from Led Zeppelin.
Okay. All right. I'll get him on that.
Yeah.
Because we did have Tom Jones. It was his birthday today, you see, so I was going to play a bit of Tom Jones. I was going to play Watch Me. But no.
Tom
okay.
Jones.
All right. Well, actually, I'll tell Locke now. Locke, you've got to put some Led Zepp on for Telf. You've got to play some, Locke, you've got to play some Led Zeppelin for Telf.
Their biggest hit, you know what their biggest hit is?
We can't play Stewart Heaven. It's too bloody long.
No.
Whole Little Love?
Yeah.
Whole Little Love. All right. John McBeth joins us then as we wrap it all up with Telf. Man who I was on stage with just on the weekend at the Kura Rugby Club, and he was goddamn funny, doing a hell of a speech. Welcome back, sir. You got Telfer on the other line.
Johnny.
Oh, nice to talk to both of you, mate. Telf, very nice to chat, mate.
I'm just hoping you haven't got any dirt on me, have you?
Not that would go on here, no.
Quinny spared me a few, which I was very pleased about. I had a few on him as well, actually, but...
of course, yeah, and that's always the danger.
50 years to the day yesterday that Brendan's broadcasting career.
John, you'd be somewhere around 50 as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, my first day in broadcasting was on the 13th of January 1967. So, but I haven't been consistently involved like you. I've potted and done a bit here and there over the last few years, but always doing something, Telf. But it's the only thing I've done really. So, we're up there, mate. Because I've got quite a few years on you. So
so 1960. I can remember 1967. That was about the time, was it? On every night at 6:30 on the ZB network on 2ZB. I imagine 3ZB and 1ZB. They'd have a thing called Today in Sport with Philip Leishman. Remember that?
and sponsored by Gold Medallion tracksuits.
Yeah.
Oh, I want one of those tracksuits. I want one of those tracksuits.
Gold Medallion. That's right. And Phil would have this little bulletin, 7 or 8 minutes. And even before, years before I joined broadcasting, it was I think the television news didn't start till 7 o'clock in those days. So 6:30 was must listen to radio, as they say. Yeah,
exactly. And that's the reason I got involved. I was in broadcasting in Timaru, and I was injured playing rugby, and I sat around in the afternoon wondering how my team was getting on, because there were no cell phones or anything, as you know, and back in those days. And I had to wait until 6:30 before we got the results, because the Saturday 6:30 thing would be followed by a local, outlet. And so I said, this is crazy. So I started ringing around the grounds during the day and put some progress results on. Yeah, so you're right, 6:30 was it. You'd gather around, stays at 6 o'clock closing, so you're still on the pub.
And the other guys that I can remember used to kick in there were Grant Nisbet. He was...
that guy's still in the saddle. Good God, Nisbet.
He, in fact, I think is probably more than 50 years of broadcasting, because he was on the air well and truly, I think, when I joined in 1973. So he would have been about your era, would he?
Yeah. I think he was a 68er, so he started the year after me, I think. And there was guys like Wayne Andrews. I mean, Gary Ahern's been around a long time as well. Yeah. Gary was doing it. And in those days, Marty, it was all out of Wellington, pretty much. It was a head office setup where everything went out on a network from Wellington, with reports coming in from, a sizable team in Auckland and Christchurch, the likes of Peter Sellers in Dunedin and then in Clyde Baxter in Hamilton.
Remember, John, in summer as well, and I remember doing one of these trips, and I just thought I'd won the the lottery or Golden Kiwi or something. I was asked to go to Wellington and work on Sports Roundup on the YC network, which used to come on the air about the middle of December.
Yeah, the hazy, lazy days of summer. Mate.
Basically, it was a diet of cricket.
You're right.
Cricket, but we used to have all these other sports, the National Softball Championships and the National Cycling Championships, athletics, and it was a thing that we used to love working on, didn't we? The YC Sports Roundup. You would have done a lot of shifts there.
I did a lot of shifts on that. It sort of became a permanent thing for me during the summer when I had my few years. It was the forerunner of radio sport.
Yeah, it was forerunner. That's where I got involved. John, both of you have had the privilege. I mean, I've had the privilege of going to Olympic Games, but I don't get to call things. I get to report on things. Both of you you spoke on Saturday night at Kurau, John, about some of the gold medals that you've called. And Telf, you've done this as well. Is that the greatest? I mean, out of all the sporting things you get to do, world championships and everything else, but there's something else when you see the flame and you realise the whole world is involved there. And I remember when I saw it the first time, I stopped. My heart skipped a beat and I thought, my God, this is actually the world. The whole world is here. Is that the best thing you've done, calling gold medals?
Yeah, it is. The Olympic Games, particularly, I suppose, track and field, because there's always 70,000 people there. And, I just love that, the cauldron of, track and field finals in front of 70,000, particularly in places, say, like Australia. I can remember Kathy Freeman winning the 400 metres and the whole of Australia just went bonkers, went nuts. It was about 9 o'clock at night in Sydney, and nothing beats the Olympic Games. I mean, I've done a few bits and pieces with rugby tours and so forth, and they're great, as has John. But I don't know about you, John, but to me, the Olympic Games is the thing that I remember the most vividly in terms of commentary work.
Yeah, probably, Telf. I mean, like you, though, I got a bit older and became a bit cynical about it all, and you'd see someone win the 100 metres as you did in Seoul, and you'd be thinking to yourself, what's he on or what's she on? And, so that really took some of the gloss out of it. But certainly the Olympics, and I was fortunate to have commentated at 3 Winter Olympics, which I found so refreshing from the summer equivalent. But even then, I found that, the more you delved into it, the more you were sort of a bit, suspicious about some performances. And that really, but that's the same with all sport, isn't it? You just don't know. If you could sit there and say, everyone's clean, what a great race. But when you sit there and say, what a great race, but
I've changed my opinion slightly on that. I mean, I'm absolutely against drugs, but then I ask myself this question: there's all sorts of things that you can take legally to make you better than you are, but there's some things you can't take which are deemed illegal that will make you better than you are or run faster than you are. And I'm just wondering whether that's consistent.
Nothing's consistent in the world. We will finish on the song, but we're just going to play this, then we're going to fade it, so we've got a few more minutes to talk. Brendan wants to go out. We were going to play Tom Jones because it's his birthday today. But Brendan, you're choosing Whole Lotta Love, Led Zeppelin. Why?
Oh,
it's
mate,
just one of the great
the guitar
songs. Jimmy Page and the voice of Robert Plant.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah.
All right, so 50 years, John. We were saying that, you know, the saddest thing to me. Oh, look, I've got a quick text here, Martin. I remember when Brendan was on TV. My grandmother was in her 90s, couldn't stand him. So when he signed off, my grandmother used to wave at the TV, say goodbye, take a holiday while you're away. Says great. But I tell you what, this is the beauty of what we do, though, isn't it, John? Is that some love you, some hate you, mate, but as long as they're still listening or watching.
Absolutely. And Telf, like all of us, you know, Quinny and Nisbo and that, we'll all get those detractors, those who say you're hopeless and what are you doing there, and others who say, gosh, I love what you guys do. So you take the good with the bad.
Yeah, I think Quinny used to say it once, as long as a third like you, doesn't matter if a third don't like you and the other third don't care.
Yeah,
that's good enough, and I used to think that's right.
You've got to have thick skin and broad shoulders.
Yeah. John, the saddest thing for me today is that, and I love American sports, and I love the fact that they treasure their presenters, and a lot of these guys retire in their 90s because you've got to have some experience. You've actually got to have historical perspective on sport. We've gone away from that. I see sports presented on the news these days who look 12 years old to me, telling me about Muhammad Ali, and I'm going, what? Without Google, you wouldn't have a single sentence to say.
Exactly. Yeah, I swore I'd never become a grumpy old bugger.
Too late.
You know, I am one. And,
too late.
Too late. Yeah. I like that. What you say. I like what you say, Marty. There are some countries, and Australia's not bad at it either, but America in particular, they use people because of their experience and credibility and knowledge and history and everything. You know, people don't get overexcited, and it's really impressive.
You look at the age of some of those reporters on 60 Minutes in America. I can remember Mike Wallace. He was nearly 90, and he was still doing stuff.
Well, Walter Cronkite was there forever, wasn't he? And you know, and you look at that great broadcasting. Look, I just salute all of you. And I know when I came along, I was a young Turk and I was making a noise and I was anarchic and all of that kind of bollocks. The older that I've got, mate, I just sit back and working with you on the weekend, John, was fabulous, mate. And working with Telf every week is brilliant as well. You know, you learn so much for a start, but also, you don't do this for 50 years without being good at it, fellas. Can I say that out loud? Because you just don't, Brendan. Well, you don't stay in this business.
Here's my theory, that success in broadcasting is not necessarily measured by your ratings or your salary. It's whether you can survive. And to survive in broadcasting, which I think all three of us have, and Quinny as well, is in a quiet, reserved, sort of unabashed way, is to succeed.
Yeah.
Survival is success. There's a lot of people come along, make a lot of noise, and fade very quickly in this business. But a few of us last.
Yeah, you got to duck a few knives and a few every now and again. Well, I tell you what, not just burn bridges, I've nuked them and then I've pooed on the top of that, John. Don't worry about that. I can write a book about how to burn the bridge, brother.
Yeah. We should have talked beforehand.
Oh, look, a pleasure to have you on.
I remember when Marty was flying up for a job with you, Telf, and he was working at a Channel Z in Wellington. And I was working on an opposing station, but not quite as young and raucous as his station. And he said, I'm going up to have a crack at this job. And I thought, bloody hell, what sort of chances he got. What a great chance and what a great career you've made out of it, mate.
Oh, thanks, mate. I appreciate that.
And it's probably no surprise that a lot of people don't like us, because you threw a typewriter at me one day, didn't you? Or my producer?
No, I actually threw a vector at Glenn's head, is what I did, Brendan. And that was in your book. You had a chapter in your book about it. The Thin White Duke, incandescent with rage. I remember the words, Brendan, you said.
Yeah. But anyway, it's
been great.
We're all still here, mate.
You've had a fantastic career, mate. I remember being over in, Los Angeles in '84, sitting in the back of a bus with you and John Davies, the lovely, great late John Davies, and someone asked a question, and away you went, and I thought, God, Telfer, he can argue anything, can't he? Hell, I'll never keep up with these sort of guys. Wow, what he's talking about now. And then I realised that, that was what you did all the time. If John Davies had said, that's black, you would have said, that's not black.
He would have argued with it. That's exactly that. He would have argued with it. Brendan, a fabulous career, and I know
Marty.
we've only had an hour or something to talk about it. We could spend so much longer, and I thank everyone that's been listening to this as well, and I thank you, John, for joining us as well, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Cheers, mate. I've enjoyed that. Yeah, well done.
Thanks, Johnny. Cheers, matey. Bye-bye.
It has been brilliant, mate. It's not over yet. You're still going to join us every Wednesday as we talk, and I sat here today, and as soon as that golf story came up today about Live Golf, the first person that was sitting there going, well, let's go to Telf, let's talk to him about that. So we'll be back in touch with you over the next few days about that, because that's going to unfold in front of us, isn't it?
It's enough. Let Robert take over.
Let Robert take over and call us out, because he's got a whole lot of love. Plunket.